I will traditionally start with the schedule of Sergei Lavrov on the 13th of October. The minister will meet with the president of the Salvadoran Legislative Assembly, Gallegos. The president will take part in the 137th Interparliamentary Union Assembly that will be organized in St. Petersburg between the 14th and the 18th of October. We consider Salvador a prospective partner in Central America. Over the years, our ties have gained considerable momentum. They have become progressive and reached a new level. The agreement on the foundation of relations was signed and entered into force on the 17th of December 2012. The embassy of El Salvador was established in Moscow on the 18th of October 2012. And on the 27th of August 2016, the intergovernmental agreement on mutual visa-free travels entered into force. The 3rd June marked the 25th anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic ties between Russia and El Salvador. It occurred in 1992. In May, the Russian flag was solemnly planted in the plenary meeting hall of the Salvadoran Legislative Assembly. It was agreed to hold a range of events that mark this significant date. I'm talking about Russian Film Festival and certain exhibitions. Maintaining inter-parliamentary contact is essential for the political dialogue. The cooperation between our legislative bodies has received a special impetus from 2 visits made by the leadership of the Council of the Federation on August 2013 and delegation of the State Duma in March 2014. In May 2014, Russia was visited by the delegation of Salvadoran parliamentarians headed by the President of the Legislative Assembly, Reyes. In May 2015, the General Secretary of the ruling party, Farabundo Martin National Liberation Front, visited Moscow. We are looking forward to the progress in our diplomatic ties that are actively developed in political, commercial, economic, investment, humanitarian, and other areas. I will provide detailed information later, and it will also be published on the official website. On the 14th to the 22nd October, the World Festival of Youth and Students will be conducted in Sochi. The opening ceremony will be organized in Sochi. This large-scale international event will bring together 20,000 young persons from 150 nations. This festival will unite the youth coming from various continents with a view to achieve peace, justice, and mutual understanding in our planet. This festival will be attended by prominent public figures and politicians. Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov will take part in scientific, educational, and discussion programs of the World Festival. Within the framework of this festival, Sochi will host the first global forum of young diplomats. This event will draw a conclusion of the 4-year work of the Council of Young Diplomats that is in charge of the organization of similar regional forums that are attended by young diplomats. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov is expected to give a speech at this event. Frankly speaking, the scale of the World Forum is impressive. And the same can be said about the Global Forum of Young Diplomats. The central issue that the young diplomats will discuss information security and ecology. And they will also discuss the International Association of Young Diplomats that will unite members of political and business elites and young diplomats. Sergei Lavrov will also take part in the 14th meeting of Valdai International Discussion Club. Over the years, Valdai has proven to be a credible expert platform that hosts open and frank discussions. They bring together authorities, prominent political and public figures of Russia and other countries, and participants will discuss pressing issues of the international policy. This year, the meeting will be dedicated to differences in world development, and participants are expected to answer the question how today's global upheavals will shape the future world order. In his address to the audience, Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov will share the Russian vision for the present situation in international affairs and the prospect for its transformation. He will also answer the questions. In Arkhangelsk, from the 18th to the 19th October, Arkhangelsk will host Barents Euro-Arctic Council. This meeting will conclude the Russian chairmanship in the Council for the period 2015-2017. In the course of the meeting, participants will consider key issues that has been a focus of the Russian chairmanship. I'm talking about improving transport and logistic infrastructure, protecting environment and combating climate change, developing cultural cooperation and improving international tourism attraction of the region. Each priority was emphasized at the meeting of responsible ministers. This shows that our chairmanship was results-oriented, and the Russian chairmanship paid attention to the areas of cooperation, like cross-border economic ties, forestry, healthcare, rights of the indigenous people, educational, scientific, and youth exchanges, and joint efforts in addressing emergency situations. Following the meeting, participants are expected to adopt a joint declaration which would establish practical solutions to secure social, economic and ecological development of the Barents region, particularly in the light of the 25th anniversary of the Barents cooperation, which will be marked in 2018. On the sidelines of the meeting, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, is expected to hold several bilateral meetings with his counterparts. We will provide you with the information about his schedule. Sweden will assume the rotating chairmanship of the Council for the next 2 years. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that today, in the text of our briefing and in another section of the website, we will publish the information about the accreditation of journalists for this forum. We will provide all the information, and we'll give you all the information about the work on press conference, and also you need to get accreditation for several events within the framework of this meeting. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that accreditation will be open today, and the deadline is the 16th of October.
On the 19th and 21st of October, Moscow will host, or rather will turn into a key discussion platform on the matters of non-proliferation and arms control. The Russian non-governmental organization Center for Energy and Security, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, will hold the Moscow Conference on Non-Proliferation. A large number of participants is expected to come, including specialists, experts, and officials from different countries and, of course, international organizations. The agenda includes the most important and acute questions of the current situation in the matter of non-proliferation, arms control. On the 20th of October, the conference expects a speech from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on the key Russian approaches and the Russian priorities in this area. I would also like to say that on the margin of this forum on the 20th of October, there will be a meeting of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov with the Executive Secretary of the Preparatory Commission of the Organization for the non-proliferation and of nuclear weapons. They are going to discuss the problems of the treaty on the ban on nuclear tests, including the cooperation between the Russian Federation and the temporary Technical Secretariat and the Preparatory Commission. Russia, who ratified the treaty in the year 2000, has been constantly supporting the treaty and the activities of the Preparatory Commission, and we consider that the treaties coming into force is a priority for Russia. And I would also like to add that the event that you all know about, well, I would like to draw the attention of foreign journalists to the event. From the 14th to 18th of October, St. Petersburg will hold the 137th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union, the oldest interparliamentary organization with 173 member states. The Interparliamentary Union works in close cooperation with the UN and shares its goals and tasks. The Union includes national interparliamentarian groups. The Russian group is co-presided by the President of the Council of Federation, Matviyenko, and the President of the State Duma, Mr. Volodin. St. Petersburg is expected to hold a very representative forum with delegations from more than 160 countries, about 100 speakers and 70 vice speakers of foreign parliaments. The level of representation will be unprecedentedly high in the 128 years of history of this respected organization. We hope that this will give a wide international meaning to the discussions and the decisions of the Assembly. The main topic of the Parliamentarian Forum is promoting cultural pluralism and peace through interreligious and interethnical dialogue. At the Russian initiative, the Assembly will consider the project of the resolution on the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration on Democracy, the unity of our diversity. Now we will proceed to the current international agenda. I would like to begin with the describing of the situation, our estimation of the situation in Syria. The development of the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic stays positive. The Syrian forces, supported by the Russian air forces, continue clearing out the ISIS terrorists in the province of Deir ez-Zor, proceeding from its capital down the Euphrates. The government forces have liberated the central part of the Al-Mayadin town as well as the territory of the local airport. The army continues its offensive against the ISIS terrorists who have infiltrated the town of Karatain through the US-controlled zone around the town of At-Tanf on the border between Syria and Jordan. In accordance with the agreements within the Astana process, The Russian serviceman from the Reconciliation Center in Syria is conducting preventive work in order to prevent the violations of the ceasefire regime. This work has resulted in a significant decrease in the violations of the ceasefire regime in the de-escalation zones. Nevertheless, Idlib, East Ghouta and the South Zone still have certain attacks by the al-Nusra terrorists who are trying to undermine the current work to normalize the situation and re-establish peace in Syria. We are concerned about the presence of foreign jihadists in the South Zone who continue getting support from abroad. In these conditions, we are considering the question of liability of trans-border supplies to the Syrian territory of cargo without the authorization of official Syria. After the creation of the de-escalation zone, the humanitarian access to these regions from Damascus was opened. The Trilateral Humanitarian Committee successfully works in Damascus. It includes representatives of Russia, Syria and the UN. The liberated regions of the country restore their roads, socially important infrastructure, as well as schools, hospitals, and numerous objects are being restored or reconstructed, which creates new conditions for re-establishment of peace and the return of refugees and temporarily displaced persons. In the town of Es-Suveyda, the second production line of the local bakery was restored, which allowed to raise the output of the factory to 20 tons of bread a day, which covers the existing demands of the town. Work is conducted to restore the city medical center in Bludan in the Damascus province, where the required equipment is being delivered. In the Dera province, a power line is constructed on the Dera Herbat-Gazala region, which would allow to provide power for a large number of towns in the south of Syria. In the town of Mardamet Ashif in the Damascus province, restoration is conducted in the school with the capacity of 400 pupils. The Russian servicemen of the Reconciliation Center are continuing to provide humanitarian aid to the population in the escalation zones and outside of them. Food and the bare essentials are delivered to the towns of Herbat al-Shabab in the Damascus province, Ras al-Faleh in the Aleppo province, Ma'arin in the Hama province, and Hana Rainba in the Al-Quneitra province. Russian special medical team working in a humanitarian mission is providing qualified medical aid to the patients of the Mugabe military hospital in Aleppo. Hotspot remains in the Rukban refugee camp located on the border between Syria and Jordan in the US-established 55-kilometer deconflicting zone around the town of Et Tanf. The Americans are using the aviation and rocket artillery to prevent the entry of Syrian government forces. The people who found refuge in Rukban, and their number according to the UN exceeds 60,000 people, are today threatened with famine. They do not have access to potable water, which increases the risk of epidemics. The American command, which supervises all of this, denies humanitarian access to the camp, access to the convoys sent by the Syrian authorities and international humanitarian organizations. I just have one question. Will this information not be covered in the air of the US TV channels and in the US newspapers? Are we saying this for nothing? Are we once again facing the information blockade of this information? Humanitarian aid cannot come to the people who are in fact besieged. Neither can they come from the territory of Jordan. Among those who live In this camp, there is active work to draw new people to the illegal armed groups. The situation in Raqqa is difficult. The aviation of the US-led coalition has bombed the last water well in the Tavasuya region. The city plumbing system and the 12 other water wells who were providing the city with potable water were destroyed earlier after the US airstrikes. Will this information also be forgotten? Will it be also ignored by the United States media, who is only focused on the events in the Russian Federation or the actions of the Russian Air Force in Syria? Or will somebody finally find the courage in the US media, in the US news agencies and newspapers to talk about it with the US audience? If you do not agree, you're welcome. We are ready to answer all of your questions. But these are the facts that no one denies. But I say once again that this information does not reach the US audience, and Ms. Amanpour,
CNN broadcast, she doesn't show these photos. Now we are moving to another topic. I would like to inform you about the previous theme. I'd like to declare this. Well, I would like to sum up. On October the 11th, Moscow hosted a meeting of the contact group of CSO Afghanistan at the level of Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs. This group was established in 2005 to work out recommendations and proposals for cooperation between SCO and Afghanistan in the spheres of mutual interest. The meeting of SCO in June agreed to adjust the activity of the group after the enlargement of the organization. During the meeting chaired by the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Malgurov, parties exchanged views on challenges to security in the region and to help Afghanistan in restoring stable and peaceful and well-off state. The need was unanimously stressed to deepen the cooperation between SCO and Afghanistan in order to fulfill this task. We have supported the proposals of the Chinese party to hold the next meeting in early 2018 in Beijing. Unfortunately, we have to say that again we are hearing very hostile rhetoric towards the alleged Russian threat on the part of Danish officials. It has become a habit with them. It's a very bad habit. Recently, the Defense Minister Jörg Frederiksen made quite a remarkable statement. In the run-up to the parliamentary debates on bipartisan agreement on military expenditures for 2018-2022, Mr. Jörg Frederiksen speculated on some aggressive intentions of Russia and said that the war in Europe has become real. In this respect, sure, he called for a substantial military build-up, as Russia supposedly understands only the language of force. Well, clearly that it's a justification for increasing military expenditures of the kingdom, and we have requests to politicians of Dania to stop to cheat the Iran population. If you would like to build up your military force, so tell it clearly. Russia has nothing to do with this. We struggle to understand what military scenarios Copenhagen is preparing for. Maybe somebody will clarify us on this issue. We would like to see a constructive contribution of our Danish neighbors in the Baltic to the current discussion on strengthening stability and security in the Baltic region. However, such statements defy this task. And now I would like to comment on flagrant story on the Russian flag that were taken down from the Russian missions, from the Russian diplomatic mission that recently were working there. Yesterday we received the information. I could officially state about the official action of the U.S. Government against our diplomatic missions. Well, the compounds of trade mission in Washington and the Consulate General in San Francisco seized earlier. The Russian flags were taken down, and we consider these moves as humiliation of state symbols of Russia. We have conveyed our resolute protest to the United States. Sure, we haven't agreed on this move. It was done by the people that earlier, without any invitation, broke in our territory, broke gates and entry doors, and still then are loading there. Maybe not like raiders, but like mere occupants. The statement of the State Department that we retain property rights for these compounds is open hypocrisy. We are not. I can officially confirm that the Russian workers are not led there. Over the recent month, we were denied the access to 5 diplomatic facilities, to our diplomatic property in the United States. And the history of the Russian-American relation has never seen such actions. And along with open humiliation of the Russian flags, Americans don't conceal the fact that they actually examined the documents, the papers left in the Consulate General after the Russian workers were forced out of the compounds. And it came despite the bilateral consular convention that states that the consular archives are protected everywhere and always, even without the consulate ceases its activity. I would like once again to draw your attention that we often hear from top U.S. officials that you cite the document, but we are newcomers and we don't have much experience and we don't know these documents. But maybe it makes sense to learn such documents, in particular the Consular Convention that regulates much from what is done by the United States with absolute impunity. And I have an impression that the American political forces, not all, but a range of them, they are pervaded by anti-Russian sentiments and come along with the American security services. They try to destroy the bilateral relations. And by the way, they can make it knowingly in order to create negative background for the new United States ambassador, Mr. Huntsman, who starts his work. You know that the Russians are very patient, but our patience is limited especially when such moves take place. We have several times said that diplomacy centers on the principle of reciprocity. So that's why we proceed from the fact that you have seen all that. It was online. When the American Special Services broke into our property, these were diplomatic compounds, and when they examined the compounds and took down the flags, so the United States agreed upon the similar moves toward the Iran missions in the Russian Federation. And finally, I can say that the Russian Federation will consider retaliatory moves.
I have as well talked about another topic. We have already spoken about it during briefings and the interviews to foreign journalists in other formats. It's about the pressure under which the Russian media are today in the United States. For example, we have already said that the issues of the activities of foreign journalists are regulated only by one thing, that is the laws of the Russian Federation. No political situation, neither our attitude can influence the atmosphere, the environment created for the activities of foreign journalists. And though the things held by the representatives of the United States, of Great Britain, were allowed, as we didn't want to go to these events to go to the public. We wanted to act constructively, but as we see that the attitude is changing to the total outrage regarding Russian journalists in different countries, now we say that we have a right to reply and it's lawful. Last week, during the briefing, we have spoken about the foreign media and their obedience to Russian law. We talked about the BBC journalists that violated the laws of our country, and they were punished accordingly. And afterwards, in their own film, they accused Russia of persecutions and arrests. The previous briefing, we talked about it, and we had special facts. Today, I would like to draw your attention on a similar case. Recently, a special correspondent of The Economist magazine, the subject of Great Britain, came to one of the towns of the Sakhalin region. As you know, it's a place situated in the border area. I think that Arkady Ostromsky also knew about it. At the arrival of the vessel, the journalists took photos of the maritime terminal as well as the border officers on duty. If some of you do not understand it, I think that everybody is adult here, and you have worked in different areas within the official visits, so you have the accreditations for these sites. So if some of you do not understand, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that photo and video broadcasting in border areas is not authorized if you do not have the authorization. This is regulated by the law of the border of the Russian Federation of 1993. It's not something we invented recently. It is a law that has a long history. As a result, Mr. Ostrovsky was facing administrative charges and he was fired accordingly. I would like to stress Russian laws and the rightful requirements of the relevant authorities are to be followed. It regards Russian and foreign citizens. If some of them are, for example, Russian citizens but work for a foreign media, it does not mean that you are free to violate Russian law on the territory of our country. I am ready to answer to all your questions. If you have some trips planned, if you have some difficult situations, our employees are ready to give you some consultations. We have also noted the article published on the 11th of October. The American politicians are criticized there for their participation in discussions and programs on the Russian channel RT. They are helping Russian propaganda allegedly by their actions. So the logic is quite strange. Yesterday, Bloomberg agency asked me to give them an interview. I have a question. Today, I will participate in this interview. So when I do it, when I give an interview to Bloomberg, I help a propaganda. What propaganda? According to the British media, for example. It's a new word in journalism. It's a kind of know-how. You know this expression that the media is a fourth power, but it seems that they are going forward, the British media, I mean. So they try not only to influence the public opinion through their words, but to dictate the game rules and to say to the politicians where they may talk and where they may not. According to the logics of the authors of this article, the fact of the British man communicating with Russia means that he is helping the propaganda. We know that the Western media know exactly where is that side of the truth, the rightful side of the history, and where is the wrongful side of the history. But then, some years afterwards, everything turns out to be the other way, but the tradition has already been established. It's not new for us to face a question, either you are with us or against us. According to the mainstream in the Western media, it's like this. I recommend that you see this article because this is the end of this article. To question the freedom of speech and the freedom of talking of their Senate officers in their own country is something strange, and I haven't seen it for many years.
And of course, I remember this very famous quote. Some people believe that Churchill said that. And there's always an issue if trying to determine the author of the quote. And this expression is well known. There are some people who believe they have the right to speak whatever, but if someone would decide to contradict them, that would be a violation of the law. But in general, if we would decide who is trying to help whom, who is playing in the hands of whom, and this very phrase which was used by the British journalists, it might seem that it is the British media which are playing in the hands of someone, but who is this someone? That part of the American establishment which is infected with Russophobia and which is being supported by the special services. Because they're actively elaborating this very topic of Russia Today's insurgency. And I have to draw the attention by the statement made by the current time, by Mr. Sindelar, about the US actions against Russia today. It is a very respectful and experienced journalist who is saying that she and her resources are not enough to have any kind of information about any sort of actions aimed against Russia today in the US. So she does not see any ground for retaliation. Are you serious, Daisy? You know that such comments are incredibly confusing because it turns out that such a credible representative of the media is living in a kind of information vacuum. And I do not believe that she's lost in this information flow. There's an information vacuum. She's been disconnected from the internet. She's not watching the news. Over the course of the last days and weeks, with regard to the restrictions made against Russia Today and the US, a lot has been said. Perhaps Madam Sindelar had something different in mind, and maybe she meant something else. Maybe she meant that there is nothing illegal about the actions aimed against Russia today. But I believe that she would not notice that the retaliatory measures against the US media, of which we spoke lots recently. We've received some questions during the last briefing and before this briefing, and I would like to answer those questions. In particular, there was the question from the Wall Street Journal regarding Russia's attitude towards the closure of the Taliban movement office in Qatar. I believe that this issue of our closure or the continuing of its actions is an internal affair of Afghanistan. This office was created as a platform for advancement of the context between the official Kabul and the Afghan armed opposition within the framework of launching national dialogue. Unfortunately, no substantial results were yielded by these actions. Moreover, certain countries use this platform to resolve their entirely domestic issues. For example, the US held negotiations with the Taliban movement on the exchange of an American soldier to 5 prisoners of Guantanamo. There was also a question from the Russian media about the visit of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Mr. Jagland, to Russian Federation. We are now working out the possibility of such a visit to Russia. As for the topics to be discussed, perhaps Russia's Federation participation in the Council of Europe's action. Now I'm ready to take your questions.
Japanese TV Fuji, the question about the North Korean problematic. Last week there was a visit of the delegation from LDPR to Pyongyang. There were negotiations with Kim Jong-nam, and they talked about the tests of ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, and there was an ambassador of Russia in that country. And what were the details in that the ambassador informed to Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia? And in your statement, you mentioned the Moscow Conference on Non-Proliferation. And that conference is expected to participate together with the North Korean delegation. And thus we would like to ask, do you have any information on this visit of the North Korean delegation? And do you plan any bilateral talks in the framework of this event? Or maybe there is some possibility for dialogue between the Americans and North Koreans? I can state that about your second part, I shall you shall get the information from North Korean side, and you can also refer to the embassy of North Korea that is working in Moscow, and you perfectly understand that we can comment on the participation of the officials of Russia in such events, and this issue is also started by the other embassies about their officials. You'll get the answer to this question today or tomorrow. As for the visit of the political party LDPR, this is a party that has their own ideology, and they are performing the visits to various countries. As for the information from our ambassador, of course we received some information, and this is our internal correspondence, and I can get additional information about what information we could share with you. Yes, please. РИА Новости. The opposition movement Syria Tomorrow informs that allegedly on October 13 there will be the visit of the leader of this group to Moscow. Is it true? Do you have any information? And I'm going to discuss this with the minister Lavrov. I can say that the visit and actually the plans of this visit we do have. As for the time and the participants of this the participants of this meeting will share this information as soon as we get it. I would like to remind you that Russia is consistently supporting peaceful settlement of the situation in Syria, and of course through multilateral inclusive dialogue, and of course an important factor in this regard is the consolidation of opposition. You know very well what is the purpose for constructive dialogue with the government to achieve peace and to restore the stability in the country. And proceeding from these goals, the contacts with various representatives of Syrian oppositions are being conducted, and we inform you about all these contacts. As for details, as soon as we get the information, we'll share it with you. I would like to repeat that we have the plan to organize this visit. Yes, please. Kristina Babayeva, live. I have two questions. First, the position on Catalonian issue, and the second question. You probably have read that the Foreign Minister of Latvia said that your statements are inappropriate and questions the credibility of some authorities of MFA. As for the first question, our position, well, you have two questions that are actually linked to each other. We started from the discussion of the issue in Catalonia. I'm not going to repeat my position, because our position was reported before the events in Catalonia, during these events, and after that. And the statements were important for Spain, and the position was a constructive one, and it was clear, and it was not in contradiction to the previously stated position of the Russian Federation regarding this issue. We were not just surprised, but we were outraged by the statements of this person whom you mentioned. And as we read in the media, there were no refutation about this, about Russia's involvement in the situation in Spain. This person who was brave enough to make such a statement said, unlike him, Russia has its principled position, and we reiterated it not once. The statement was published yesterday or some time ago on the official webpage of the ministry. Russian foreign minister, representative of the presidential administration at various levels, also repeatedly stated and reiterated Russia's position on this issue. I believe no one doubts that we have a clear and consistent position on this issue. Everything I have said now can be confirmed by the facts, and it has the confirmation, and you can make your own opinion about who's right and who's wrong. And I just answered your question about the credibility. Russia Today, I have a question. Minister of Foreign Affairs said that Russia is ready to be a mediator in the talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Have you received any responses from Saudi Arabia and Iran? For the moment, as far as I know, there were no answers. And as for this initiative and the developments around this initiative, of course, we will provide additional information later. Kovaleva Sofia, Japanese TV Sapara. I would like to specify the question of my colleague. In the messages about the news on Korean missile, what will be Russia's reaction on this launch? And the second question on the forthcoming session in St. Petersburg of the interparliamentary session. Will North Korea participate in this event? You should better refer to the specific agencies about this, to the embassy of North Korea. This is just ethical to do it like that. As for the participation of the delegation of North Korea in the interparliamentary session, again, I would like to state that you should refer to the embassy of North Korea. From our side, you'll get this information, but first of all, we have an official representative of the embassy of North Korea in Russia. But I will specify this issue later. As for our future reaction and possible actions by North Korea, I can say that the reaction will be afterwards, but it will be consistent and it will be based on international law and fundamental Russia's position on this issue. Yes, please.
ABC News, the US, we received information that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not exclude the possibility for the further cuts in diplomatic staff. Could you please specify this issue? And today, regarding your statements that the US authorities, with their hostile steps, have consented, kind of, to retaliatory actions, what kind of retaliation can we expect? This retaliation is to be determined by us, as I've already mentioned, and we are in no rush. We have enough time. But as for the cuts in diplomatic staff, the thing you mentioned, I believe that the actions we see by the US is not only coming to a close, it is giving additional impetus. This is absolutely outrageous behavior towards Russian diplomats and Russian diplomatic compounds and Russian property. I gave you a specific example. The 5 diplomatic compounds which were owned by the Russian Federation could not be accessed by any employee of Russian foreign missions. And even if we would suppose and would try to put it into kind of brackets and try to understand the whole political motive, we have engineers as well and technical personnel, and they could examine our own facilities and our own compounds, but they are banned from doing that. At the same time, they declare that those facilities are indeed our own property. But with each day, maybe with each week, we are witnessing more and more distorted and perverted anti-Russian actions. So the whole package of retaliatory measures could be used against the US when something is being done by the American Special Services, any kind of law enforcement bodies against Russian diplomatic facilities or Russian diplomatic property. They are confirming that they agree for us to take retaliatory measures. We've mentioned that through the embassy in Moscow and through the heads of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and of the State Department. We've done it several times, and we've taken those reciprocal retaliatory actions, and we said that any hostile action would unfortunately be met with retaliation. What kind of retaliation? As I've said, this is an issue that would be developed further.
Frankly speaking, I would like to move on to normal dialogue on the questions of mutual interest. And as you see, there is a large number of such questions, starting from Syria and moving on to many other topics. But you see yourselves what is happening. Who is behind this? We have our guesses. Sometimes we share our opinions with you. I think there are more questions to the Americans than to us. Just imagine for a second that the initiative, I think we should always use the help of our creative mind. Imagine that, for example, the Spasa House was invaded by the Russian law enforcement agencies. Imagine that they took down the US flag, driven away the diplomats, and started reading the consular documents and other documents. Can you imagine that? How do you like it? This is basically unimaginable. They can't even deal with the police. And they do the same to the Russian property, and it has already been done. Why? On what basis? Did the US side have the right to take such actions? Did they have any right to do this and to touch our flag, to touch the flag over the Russian diplomatic object in the United States? I say once again, situations can be different. Perhaps someone will find some US law from some 1813, according to which, and such laws exist, that the Americans suddenly find that date hundreds of years on flags or foreign missions or something like that. Many miracles can happen there. Well, all right, but we have diplomatic contacts between embassies. We have the principles of mutual respect for each other. We don't talk about sympathy, we just talk about mutual respect based on laws. Why do they come and take down our flags themselves? Who authorized that? Who gave the American services the right to touch the flag of the Russian Federation? Just imagine for a second, once again, use your creative thinking, that some farmer received guests, the American Mr. Smith, taking down the American flag from his house. Can you imagine that? Once again, no, you can't. Why? because the flag of another country, which is the property of another country, and the object on which the flag is located is also the property of another country, why can somebody touch it? What is this outrage? And you ask about the alleged caps on 150 diplomats and the decrease in their personnel. You can imagine what the response measures can be. Just use your creative thinking, that's it. Just imagine that everything that was happening to Russia in the United States, starting from the consulate generals and ending with Russia Today TV channel, at least a tiny bit applied to the US diplomats and the US citizens and the US media in the Russian Federation. Can you imagine what would happen in the US media? Why does everyone remain silent about Russia? And all this was being done under some completely made-up pretext on the involvement in the elections. They do not provide any truth. They spend enormous amounts of money, millions of dollars, to create some commissions who produce fake information and keep doing nothing. They don't even have any evidence, don't have any witnesses. They keep speaking and talking the whole day, in spite of the fact that the US faces natural disasters, that they have something to do in the international arena. They keep talking and talking about this, spending millions, I think tens and hundreds of millions of US taxpayer dollars, who are being influenced using their own money and to build up the anti-Russian position, to conduct these illegal actions against Russia, Russian diplomatic property and the Russian media. I think that your question is right. It is high time the United States media and those in America who are not under the influence of emotions to think why it is being done and what will our response be, what this will result in. Thank you. Your question, please. Korean TV radio broadcast company, Ekaterina Babaeva. Yesterday, TASS agency published an interview with the Foreign Ministry of North Korea. He was asked to comment on the liability of the implementation of the Russian-Chinese roadmap, to which he replied that in the current situation, when the United States are using the sanction pressure and the direct military threats, he thinks that the atmosphere is not suitable for the start of talks. How could the Russian Foreign Ministry comment on this? The Russian Foreign Ministry has reiterated on several occasions that we need to create the right and constructive atmosphere around the settlement of the North Korean issue and the North Korean situation in general. And all the initiatives have to be supported by the creation and the maintenance of such atmosphere. This is the first point. As for your question on the reaction of the North Korean side, I think that in many things the North Korean representative, although I have not seen the interview itself, I'm only basing my opinion on the interview, he reproduced the words of the initiative itself, that it is a two-way road. So we're talking about actions from both sides. That is why it is called the initiative on double freezing. And everything is very close to the text. Yes, please. Kurdish Durga TV channel. The Turkish President Erdogan declared in Kiev that he did not consider Crimea a part of Russia, did not recognize it. Will it affect the further cooperation or the diplomatic relations between Russia and Turkey and the cooperation in Syria? I can say that any declarations on the recognition or non-recognition of Crimea will not affect the fact that Crimea is a part of the Russian Federation. We have different partners, they all have different interests, but I say once again that no declarations on Crimea being a part of the Russian Federation will not affect the facts. Yes, please. By the way, since we started talking about Crimea, tomorrow I will meet journalists there in Simferopol on their invitation. Last time I was holding a briefing in Mrie Hotel for the local journalists, and many people attended it. And we had many journalists from the Foreign Ministry Press Center, and I had an invitation to arrive there, and I'm going to do that tomorrow. That's why we will have interviews and meetings, and you're all invited to come there and to see for yourselves what it is like. Unfortunately, for some reason, many people are unwilling to do so. Perhaps they are frightened. I mean, foreign politicians. But I think the best solution is to create your own vision of this region by judging for yourselves. We are always ready to help you organize such trips to Crimea if you require that. If you do not require that, you're simply welcome to come yourselves to talk to the people, to attend the objects which are open and get authorization to visit the objects that are closed. I say again, we are always ready to provide any required assistance. And we are waiting journalists tomorrow in Simferopol. Yes, Caucasus. Vesti, Maria Vladimirovna, what do you think about the liability of NATO position on the security situation in South Caucasus? Does it take into account the new political reality, like, for example, the new terrorist threat? I will elaborate on your question. It is a very difficult one, and the next briefing I will provide additional information, or we will publish a separate comment on the website of the ministry. Yes, please. Edward Chesnakov of Komsomolskaya Pravda. On the 15th of October, Austria will have parliamentary elections. What are your expectations of this event? Of course, elections in any country, and especially in Austria, are an internal affair of the state. This is a reflection of the will of the people, especially when we're talking about parliamentary elections. That's why we proceed from the belief that everything will be performed in accordance with the law, and I see no reason to make any comments on it's an internal affair of this state.
Maybe when we have the results in place, we will be able to comment through our parliamentaries. But now I see no point in commenting upon it if... Oh, yes. Yes, please. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova, GG Press, Anastasia. At the last briefing, you promised to tell us more about the upcoming business mission to the Kuriles at the end of October. Do you have any additional information for us? Unfortunately, I do not have any additional information, but as soon as we have some, it will be published or presented during briefings or sent to you. And one more question. I did not have the courage to ask it. Maybe, well, you shouldn't then. Well, sometimes you should trust your guts, you know. Yes, that's true. But still, I would venture to ask, regarding the Russian diplomatic mission, that the flags were torn down and the Russian representatives were not being allowed there. Maybe this is not the issue because it was rented. Once again, all the facilities we are talking about, any major facilities, were purchased as property back during the USSR days. You can visit our website, because today we are going to use the social networks to publish the information and the photos of the facilities. We've done it some 3 weeks ago, and today we're going to do that again. And maybe we would update the information. This is the property of the Russian Federation. We have took some offices, but residents of the General Council in San Francisco and objects in Maryland and Osterby, all this is the property of the Russian Federation. So there is no doubt that, once again, that these are the objects that we paid for. These are the objects
the facilities that from the times of Cold War, they have never faced these issues. The American authorities have never questioned the fact that these facilities belong to Russia. Once again, this is the property of the Russian Federation. Well, you are saying that this is a property of the Russian Federation, and the fact that the Russian diplomats are denied access is a violation of law. So why can't you go to court? Maybe you know the presidential order to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to prepare special documents that need to be filed to a court. Maybe we will choose a certain company or organization that will represent Russian interests. At the moment, we are preparing all the necessary documents, and we still have not chosen a company that will represent our interest in court proceedings. So I'll ask you to find all the information on the ministry's official website. But once again, I'll say that we have received the demand of the President. Yes, please. I can ask this question.
We started the operation to Idlib. Is everything going on over there as it was agreed in Astana? Is everything okay from your side?
Это вопрос к Министерству обороны, к нашим военным экспертам.
You know, it's a question that should be posed to the Ministry of Defense, to their experts. So I say you goodbye if you don't have any more questions.